All right. Well, that was a powerful word. I spoke to Warren last night, and I just felt this connection that Yahweh has a move of his Ruach for his people. And if the word is true, then the Ruach, the spirit within you, will testify to that truth. Amen? And that's my hope and prayer. And I think, like Warren, over the years, I have seen so many people come into the ministry, leave, and come in and leave. And I've asked the brothers, I've asked the sisters, what's going on? And it's usually a deep wound. It's a hurt. I'm going to pick up my ball and go somewhere else. But then you're never going to get the healing. You're never going to get the hurt. We've even had it. I've spoken to a sister in this camp where it's even happened in this camp where there is a hurt and then you go and you move. But really, Yahweh is calling us not to act in that natural realm, but to come apart and be a part, not of the world, but of the one new man. So I want to spend these next days talking about the one new man, because ultimately Yahweh wants to raise up one new spiritual man. And that's the spiritual man that he is going to hand the kingdom to, because the kingdom is now, which means personal responsibility and action. Because if it's tomorrow, you never have to do anything today. Well, the rapture's going to happen tomorrow. I don't have to do anything today. I don't have to worry about understanding the book of Revelation, because it's not going to affect me, because I'm going to be having a gin and tea and I'm going to be raptured out of here. That kind of thinking means that we have no personal responsibility. And those of us that came from a Christian, traditional Christian background, many had that rapture theology ingrained within it, which was an absence of responsibility. But as we go through this time, I want us to focus on the small things of the day, because it's those small things of the day that we have to start with that will affect the greater things. So we have to start by following Yahweh in the very small things. Do you agree with me? Just the small things. I started by closing my shop on the Sabbath. Just a small thing, which led to something else, which led to something else. So it's the stewardship with the small things that Yahweh asks us to do first. Because as believers, we're looking out and we're seeing society is breaking down all around us. There is a fermentation of trouble, of trying to separate groups and make this group against that group and this. I mean, that is what they are trying to do. Break down any formulation of a people coming together powerfully, cohesively as one new man. They are terrified of that. The powers that be, that are operating under a satanic, Luciferic realm. Because Yahweh says the power is not in fragmentation and people being against people, but when all people can come together as one new spiritual man under the resurrection of Yahusha. That is an unstoppable force. Unstoppable. But we're seeing society breaking down all around us, and we find ourselves living daily in the very jaws of Satan, don't we? We literally go out to work and we live in the jaws of Satan. It's devastating. We live in the jaws of Satan constantly. And why did that happen yesterday to me? Because if I'm going to come here and stand before you and teach about the spiritual man, then Yahweh needs to make sure that I am truly humble. And I go, wow, I can't deal with this. This is beyond me. I cannot overcome this in my natural man. Only the spiritual man can. And that's why I'm prepared and ready to teach this. Because in my flesh, I have nothing. It will all be taken away in the jaws of Satan, if that be. And you know what? I still have everything, because the spiritual man is victorious in Yahushua. But we're going to find that more and more and more as the days progress, that we will find that when we stand up and when people realize that you're a believer, that they will try and attack you in your business, in your family, in your lives, because there is such a adversarial spirit out there against truth and righteousness. And the days are getting darker and darker. So we have to learn how to battle. And our war is not against flesh and blood. But naturally, that's the first thing that you go to, isn't it? You start to get in the soul. You start to get in the flesh. And then you can get down that track. But that's not where the victory is won. That's not really where the battle is run. We have got to learn how to develop, to summon up all the powers of the Spirit so that we can contend with hell, with our body and soul. But it's by summoning the power of the Spirit within us. But have we been taught how to do that? I don't think we have. So this Sukkot, I want this to be a training camp for all of us, that we would train and learn how to move away from primarily accessing our soul realm or our natural body realm in the fight. Because that's the default. That's what we're taught to go to in the natural world. Go back to your soul. Go back to your body realm, and that's where the fight is. But that's not. We need to learn, and it needs to become instinct, how to primarily access when trouble comes. Where? The Spirit. That's where I want to learn primarily to access the Spirit when trouble comes, not to start to get worked up in my soul and then make actions and take the wrong actions in my flesh, but have my spirit activated so that my spirit will then control my soul, which will then tell my flesh how to act. It is turning my world and your world upside down. That's what Yahweh wants to do with the one new spiritual man. That's what he wants to do. And to do that, we're going to have to learn how to discern between the parts of our makeup, because we are tripartite beings. But this world doesn't teach us that. We are tripartite beings. He formed us from the dust, the flesh. He took his spirit and breathed into us, and then we became a living soul. Why are we a living soul? Because your will resides within your soul, but your spirit is where you commune with Yahweh. But ultimately, your soul is where the will is. And there's the problem. Because the will has communion more with the flesh than it does with the spirit. And you and I have to learn. I'm preaching to the choir here, but I am in the same boat as you. And I had the ultimate test yesterday. That's a test of integrity, of being able to even communicate this message. Because I believe that we're at such a part in our life as believers that Yahweh is not going to allow false humility or false spirit amongst the congregations. It's going to be a test of authenticity. And that means that we are promised one thing: tribulation and trouble, because that's the refiner's fire. And I'm in it right now. Pray for me. Pray for me. Literally the jaws of Satan. But I know that it's all going to be used for his glory somehow. Even if I lose everything, I'll still have my faith. And so will you. But that is the spirit man. So without further ado, let's open up our scriptures. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 3. Because we are here to learn the spiritual battle. How's the audio in the back? Is it good? Okay, splendid, splendid. So, I know there's many of you from different parts of the world, and we've all come from different places, but hey, if you're a Moses on the hill here, you're a leader, don't forget that Joshua's in the plain, okay? Look out for each other. Look out for each other. Some of you are natural leaders. The Moses is on the hill, but don't forget that Joshua's in the plain. Okay, so look out for one another. And I may be a Moses on the hill today, but, something may happen to me like yesterday, and I feel like I'm in the ditch, and I need to be ministered to too. I need to be ministered to too. We have to help one another. You can't depend upon just me. I'm one part of the body, and we all work together. I have a function, and I walk in that function, and I walk in that calling, but I do things that I'm not very good at in the ministry because I have to. We have to help one another, and we have to start walking together and all participating more and more and more. Because I know that Satan hates this work immensely that's coming out of Torah to the tribes. How do I know that? Because the kind of attacks that we get, that I get in my family, that we get in the ministry, those in leadership, those that are doing the work, I know that because we are affecting many people across the world and the nations, and it's all through this internet, crazy, amazing technology. And whilst we can operate in it, then we operate in it. And I talk to Corey all the time, and I say, these men doing all this stuff behind the scenes, they're like the scribes of the old days. Because they are literally taking the information and transporting it out by horse and across planes, and it's all electronic, but it's amazing. Back in the 90s, ministries would put out 750 tapes in a month, and they'd mail them all out, cassette tapes. And we can do that in an hour just through this technology. And within a couple of days, 4,000 people have been. That, to me, is unreal. And sometimes at Torah to the Tribes in Salem, we'll have 15, 20 people show up. And then people arrive from out of town, and they're like, wow. We're like, what did you expect? We thought it was going to be huge. I was like, no, it's just kind of like a Bible study, really. But it looks really good online, huh? Cool. Humble beginnings, humble beginnings. And that's right, we do need to stay that way. But if our gospel be hid, it is hid to them that are lost, in whom the God of this world hath blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Messiah, who is the image of Elohim, should shine unto them. For we preach not ourselves, but Messiah Yahusha the Master, and ourselves your servants for Yahusha's sake. For Elohim, who commanded the light to shine out of darkness, hath shined it into our hearts, to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of Elohim in the face of Yahusha Messiah. But we have this treasure in earthen vessels. That's your flesh. That the excellency of power may be of Elohim and not of us. We are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not until utter despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed. Always bearing about in the body the dying of the Master Yahusha, that the life also of Yahusha might be made manifest in our bodies. Yahweh wants to reveal the whole story of restoration to his people. But Satan has stolen the minds of a generation. I work with 17 to 23-year-olds. The mind of a whole generation has been stolen. They don't even know how to spell Bible. And you think I'm joking. They don't know the difference between Jesus Christ and William Shakespeare. They literally have no idea. There's a gentleman that went around a college in San Francisco. What's the big university? Is it Brown? Is that in Berkeley? Going around the Berkeley campus, and it was right after some gun legislation. And he was going up to students on Berkeley campus, and he was saying, now, do you think if the right gun legislation had been in place, that Lee Harvey Oswald would never have been able to assassinate Jesus Christ? Oh, yes, I think the right legislation. And that's how... This is outrageous and terrifying. It is terrifying. The minds of our whole generation have been stolen. For 15 years, I had my own little salon, and I lived out in my little log house in the woods, studying the Bible, preparing for these days. And then 4 years ago, I decided to open a school. And I got thrust back into the world because I'd kind of become quite a recluse in my studies, and I literally rode my bike, hung out with my wife, and read the Bible. That's about it. And now I'm back in the world, but not of the world. And it's changed in 15 years, in a generation, less than a generation. I see the minds, they're gone. They are gone. They are vaccinated up. They've got the immune system of like a dead cat. You just open the window and everybody's sick. I mean, literally. I mean, they 18-year-olds with dark circles and bags under their eyes. They look worse than your grandmother. I mean, I'm serious. Our whole generation vaccinated up, high on drugs, have no idea, eating GMOs. They are walking toxic vessels of destruction. Ill-educated. I just had to do a class on the Constitution. It was law, and if I didn't do that class, I'd have got fined $25,000. They didn't even know what century it was formed. They didn't even understand who America seceded from. I mean, some of these, it was insane. I mean, I was absolutely floored. I'm like, you have an Englishman teaching a class on American history? Wow. I didn't even graduate high school. And they're paying me to do this. The federal government. Insane. What a country. What a country. Satan has stolen the minds of our whole generation, and we have all witnessed that, me more than most in these last few years. But my goodness, you see it in religion, you see it in politics, you see it everywhere. But Yahweh's breakthrough particle, look at it, 2 Corinthians chapter 4. What's the breakthrough particle? Light, isn't it? Light is what breaks through. It's a light that is so powerful that it transforms hearts. It transforms minds. It transforms bodies. We know that that light is Yahusha. Yahusha is the breakthrough light that can transform any situation. But we have to seek him daily. We have to seek him in word. We have to seek him in prayer. We have to realize that his transformative power is in these earthen vessels that we walk around in. But we have to activate it and learn how to activate it naturally. In a stressful situation, that's naturally where we go, not to the soul and not to the flesh. We're going to have to learn how to turn our worlds upside down. We're going to learn how to turn our worlds upside down, because the battleground, the area where the war most often is waged is within these earthen vessels, our mortal flesh, is it not? And when Warren was saying that people are saying, well, I don't think I'll be back to this Bible study, where was that battle going on? In their mortal flesh. And their soul, their soul was being affected by their flesh, not by the Spirit, because that's where the will resides. They needed to learn to flip it, not listen to the flesh, but listen to the Spirit, because the Spirit would have said, no, we're going to stay in unity and work this out to get the true healing. Because the problem isn't Warren, the problem is me. It's inside of me. It's always inside of me. It will always be my problem, not yours. You're just a reflection of my problems that I need healing from. So I want us to begin to transcend the soul and the flesh, because I want us to learn the governorship of the Spirit. The governorship of the Spirit, subjection to the Spirit. That is what we know today. It's our intuition. Listen to your intuition. That's the Spirit. You've got to learn to listen to the intuition. That still small voice, you're like, oh, I got to get out of here. Or, oh, hairs stand up on your back. Or somebody says something and it just testifies to you that you know. That's the Spirit. We call it intuition because we haven't tapped into it on an everyday basis, so we kind of feel more comfortable when we say intuition. Kind of downplays it a little bit, doesn't it? No, it's the Spirit, and we've got to start to have confidence in the Spirit. When we don't have confidence in the Spirit, we call it intuition. So we're going to get out of that thought pattern and transcend into embracing it and it becoming familiar in our life. So we're transcending the soul, transcending the flesh, activating the Spirit, which is our intuition. But we have to understand how to differentiate between what troubles us on every side in the body and soul, so we can experience the governing Spirit. Thereby, we will be functioning, look at the verse, in the excellency of Yahweh's power. That's where I want to live. I want to live in the excellency of Yahweh's power. Because if they come against me and I'm dwelling in the excellency of Yahweh's power, am I invincible? I am invincible. You can even kill my mortal flesh if I'm dwelling in the excellency of Yahweh's power. And that's where Yahusha dwelt, and he has given us the access to dwell there too if we pick up our crossbeam and walk in his ways. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 11. For we which live are always delivered unto death for Yahusha's sake, that the life also of Yahusha might be made manifest in our mortal flesh. So then, death worketh in us, but life in you. We have the same spirit of faith according as it is written. I believed and therefore have I spoken. We also believe and therefore speak, knowing that he which raised up the Master Yahusha shall raise up us also by Yahusha and shall present us with you. For all things are for your sakes, that the abundant grace might through the thanksgiving of many redound to the glory of Elohim, for which cause we faint not, but through our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. And here's the key. we need to differentiate between verse 12, the Spirit, verse 14, knowledge and experience, because that's the soul, and verse 16, the outward man, and that's the body. Right here within this text, verse 12, we've got the tripartite being, we've got the Spirit. Verse 14, we have got knowledge and experience. That's the soul. And then in verse 16, we've got the outward man. That's the body. Differentiate between the three and access the primary leading of the Spirit so that you can be governed by the Spirit man. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17, it says this, "For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory, while we look not at the things which are seen," that's the natural realm, "but at the things which are not seen," that's the spiritual realm. "For the things which are seen, they're going to burn." It's all temporary. It's all temporary. But the things which are not seen, they are eternal. And we spend so much time reacting to what we see, don't we? So much wasted time reacting to what we see. Our whole world, it's built upon visuals. We're all walking around. I mean, our whole world is built upon visuals. That's temporary. Yet, so little of our time are we preparing to engage in what we don't see, which is the spirit realm, which is eternal. For we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, we have a building of Elohim, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. Our bodies, they're going to decay. Our bodies are going to decay because after the fall, they weren't given to last. So we need to move into the intuition or the spirit realm and move away from the reactive soul and body realm. And our world is all about the body realm. It's all about the soul realm. And there's no power there. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 2. "For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our house which is from heaven. If so be that being clothed we shall not be found naked. But we that are in this tabernacle do groan, being burdened, not for that we would be unclothed, but clothed upon, that mortality might be swallowed up of life. Now that he that hath wrought us for the selfsame thing is Elohim, who also hath given unto us the earnest of the Spirit. Therefore we are always confident, knowing that whilst we are at home in this body, we are absent from the Master." Yahweh doesn't want to just deliver us from sin. And so many of us, coming from a traditional Christian background, have been taught, Yahweh wants to deliver you from sin. Can I get a little bit more audio volume? At least for me. I feel like I'm struggling. Yahweh doesn't just want to deliver you from sin. If you spend your whole believing life just trying to overcome the sin in your life, you're only doing part of what you're supposed to be doing. You've only been given 1/3 of the message. He wants so much more because there's 3 steps to our deliverance, and most of us monk around with number 1. Never attempting to do number 2 and number 3. Number 1, Yahweh does want to deliver you from sin. for sure and for certain. But he doesn't want you to spend the whole of your life trying to get over the sin in your life. He wants you to get over the sin in your life so that you can move into now getting over your natural self. He wants to deliver you from your natural self. You could be a really fabulous, great moral person, and he wants to deliver you from that person. Because that is the natural you that's no different from the moral bloody heathen. So you're no different than the moral heathen. I know a bunch of luciferic drug addicts who love their mother and honor their mother. You're no different than them if that's all that you're doing. He wants to deliver you from your natural self, number 2. But he also wants to deliver you from the supernatural, the wicked, evil principalities that are trying to come against you each and every day. So as a converted believer, there are 3 things that Yahushua wants to deliver you from: sin, your natural self, and the supernatural realm of evil. And when you engage in that battle, that's when you become the one new spiritual man. You will never become a spiritual believer if you are still hanging out in who you naturally are. Because I'm sick of who I naturally am. I've spent 46 years with the guy. And he drives me nuts, and most probably sometimes drives you nuts. That's the natural. No, that's not where it's at. And when the really terrifying things happen in my life, it's not men. It's the satanic, luciferic forces behind them. The demonic entities that are empowering them, that they've given their lives over to get the power, that are coming against me because I'm a servant of the king. And it's just an attack to try and get at the king. And I'm just in the way. I'm just the messenger. And they hate Yahweh. So we have to be delivered from sin. We have to be delivered from our natural person. And we have to be delivered from the supernatural. That is what Yahweh wants us to do. And none of these 3 can be omitted. None of these 3 can be omitted if we're to stay in the battle. And if we're just going to stick around in number 1, battling sin, well, that's the milk of the faith. That's the milk of the faith. And we are falling short of the redemptive work of Yahushua in our lives. Just realize that. We are falling short of the redemptive work of Yahushua in our lives if we just spend our lives trying to overcome the sins that are more akin to me. Because the sins that are more akin to Warren, well, if he's going to deal with those, I'm going to deal with mine. No. Let's move on now and deal with the natural man and crucify him. And then let's go and now understand that we need to be delivered from the supernatural. Tripartite beings, tripartite spiritual delivery too. Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. We have to see that our enemy is supernatural. And Yahweh Elohim formed man out of the slime, I like that, the slime of the earth, and breathed in his face the breath of life, and man became a living soul. A living soul. As soon as the breath of life, which became man's spirit, came in contact with man's body, that's when he became a living soul. Listen, as soon as the breath of life, which became man's spirit, came into contact with his body, he became a living soul. So the soul, man, is a combination of man's body and spirit. The soul, the man, the woman, is a combination of man's spirit and body. A tripartite being. So the Bible then calls man a living soul because that's the combination of the two where the will resides. And our job is to get the will to give authority to the spirit so that the spirit then guides the soul and the body reacts to that governorship. This is the key. Don't confuse man's spirit, though, with the Holy Spirit, because Romans chapter 8, verse 16 makes the distinction very clear. The Spirit himself doth testify with our spirit that we are children of Elohim. And in John chapter 6, verse 63, it says, it is the Spirit that gives life. The Spirit that gives life. Jacob, could you do me a favor and run down to my tent and zip up my flies both sides? I'm trying to be spiritual, but I don't want to be wet and cold tonight. So, I might need a little more volume now with all the rain coming down. Let it rain, let it rain. So, the inbreathing of Yahweh's breath brought about a twofold life. Can you hear me in the back? Oh, okay. The soulical and the spiritual. The soul and the spiritual. That inbreathing brought about the soul and the spiritual. But when Yahweh's inbreathing reacted with man's body, which of course came from the slime, the dust, it became the spirit of man. And when the spirit of man reacted with man's body and soul, this then was produced. Now we've got to the root of our spiritual or soul lives. Before the fall of Adam and Eve in the garden, there was a perfect blending of these three natures. That's the key. There was a perfect blending of these three natures. The soul, being the uniting medium, became his individuality. Can you still hear me? Okay. I can barely hear myself. Ooh. Okay, that's better. Yeah, okay. So before the fall, there was a perfect blending of the three spiritual natures. There was a perfect blending of the spirit, the soul, and the body. But after the fall, that's what we're recipients of. And that is what needs to be corrected. The soul became the uniting medium, became man's individuality. Well, he's a funny soul, isn't he? You've heard that, right? That's the man's individuality. What a funny soul that is. A distinct being. But the work that Yahweh has for us as living souls is to keep the spirit and the body in their right relationship. And that's the problem. They are not in their right relationship. And that's where we are stumbling as believers. But what is the right relationship? That's what we're all here for. What is the right relationship? The lowest is, of course, what? Huh? The body is the lowest, right? Crush the flesh. The body is the lowest. It must be subjected to the spirit, which is, of course, the highest. The spirit must govern the body. But the only way it can govern the body is that you will it, which is your soul. This is kind of sounds pretty simple, right? But it really isn't. It really isn't. Because the will, my goodness, trying to change you are so stubborn. You are such a stiff-necked child of Israel. You're sitting right up in front of me. I get to say that. And your husband's behind you going, yes, yes. See, that was his flesh right there. We, as the children of Israel, are a stubborn, stiff-necked people. And it is so hard to change our will, our soul, because our soul wants to go back where the onions and the garlic is and feed our flesh, because it doesn't want to follow the Spirit, which is the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, which will lead us into the promised land. We have got to change our will. We have got to. Truly. Sometimes the soul takes control through the intellect. This is the problem that I've seen with nearly 15 years in the Messianic movement, is the intellect. How many of us have got so caught up in Bible study and breaking down the Hebrew and the Paleo-Hebrew, and it becomes all up here. Your head starts to throb. I used to be really pretty good at Hebrew. My Hebrew now is terrible because I don't practice it the way I did. Because I read more now. I read more scripture than I did 10 years ago, where I really try to break down every letter and all of that. But now I just want to read. 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 Because I just want more of it in me. Because the problem is the intellect is in the soulish realm. So if we're doing great Hebrew roots teaching all the time, what are we building up? We're building up the soul. We're building up the intellect, which is logic and reason. Faith resides in the Spirit. Faith resides in the Spirit. And if we're just building up the intellect, the soul, then guess what's going to get stronger? Your flesh. How many carnal believers have you met in the Hebrew roots and Messianic movement? And you're like, wow. Right? Because we've been training the soul, thinking it's the spiritual. Well, this Paleo-Hebrew is highly spiritual. No, it's not. It's totally in the soulish realm. And it is building up your flesh and making you proud and looking down and judging other people, judging your Christian brothers and sisters, because now you know more than they do. But you're not spiritual, but you think you are now. And I have had to walk through that path and realize the error of my ways to even be able to get to this point today. Because once the soul takes control through the intellect, then a mental state begins. You're all mental. You end up being a little mental, don't you? The world goes, I mean, these people are mental. Mental. Absolutely nutters. In order for the Spirit to govern, the soul must give its consent. The soul must give its consent. The Spirit can't act on the body by itself. It has to have the medium or the cooperation of the soul. Your will has to submit and say, yes, Spirit, govern. That's what we have to do. Look at Luke chapter 1, verse 46. My soul doth magnify Elohim, and my spirit was glad on Elohim, my Savior. See the distinction? Luke chapter 1, verse 46. The change in the tense shows us that first the Spirit conceived joy in Elohim, and then by communicating with the soul, caused it to give expression to the feeling by means of the body. Does that make sense? That's a huge concept right there that I just thrust on you in one verse. Think about it. I'll say it again because it kind of, I think it went over. My soul doth magnify Elohim, listen, and my spirit was glad on Elohim, my Savior. So you can see the change in the tense shows us that first it was the Spirit that conceived the joy in Elohim. It was my spirit that was so joyful in Elohim. And then the spirit communicated with the soul and caused it to give expression to the feeling by means of the body. Right? Look at the order. The soul is the seat of your and mine personality. It's the seat of our personality. It's only when the soul is willing to be humbled that the spirit can ever manage the whole man. Is your soul willing to be humbled? Only when our soul is willing to be humbled can the spirit manage the whole man. That's why Yahweh hates pride above all other sins. He hates pride above all other sins because it keeps the soul, man, in a childish, carnal state where the spirit is silenced. That's why he hates pride. It keeps you in a childish state. Childish, childish, childish. The spirit is designed to interact with the spiritual world. And the body is designed to interact with the natural world. And the soul lets the decisions be manifest. The will. The soul stands there in between, exercising its power to discern and to decide whether the spiritual or the natural will reign. What's going to reign today? The spiritual or the natural? The spiritual or the natural? The soul stands there right in between, with the discernment is in the soul. But the discernment can gravitate towards the flesh, or it can gravitate towards the spirit. The spirit, of course, is the kadosh, the noblest part of man. It should be in control of us all, right? Should be in control of our whole being. The problem is the will. That's the problem. Because the will is crucial, and that belongs to the soul. So because the soul possesses such power, that's why Yahweh calls us living souls. Because the soul possesses the power of the will that can lead you into a carnal realm or into a spiritual realm. That's why you and I are called living souls. He doesn't want to keep us in the soulish realm, because the soulish realm will lead you into the carnal realm unless the soul is subject to the spirit man. And this is what is all about turning our lives upside down. We need to train our soul to listen and be subject to the spirit. That is the thing. The problem is we've only been raised in a natural realm, and our soul has been trained for years in the programming of this world to give power to the natural while simultaneously suppressing and silencing the spiritual. In fact, you're mocked and shamed when you act spiritual in the world, aren't you? They can't even compute. You're mocked and shamed when you access the spiritual in the world. But they're really the ones that are the children when they're walking in that natural realm. We have to be willing to turn our lives upside down, to soar to the higher calling. Because if the believer doesn't discern his own spirit, he invariably is ignorant of how to commune with Yahweh. Because the only place that we commune with Yahweh is in our flesh? No. In our soul? No. We only can commune with Yahweh in our spirit. And if you're only in the spirit for a minute a day, a moment a day, then that's what your communion with Yahweh is. Just a moment, just a glimpse. We only have one life. We don't even know if we'll have the next hour. So surely you want more than a glimpse in a day. Because when you're learning Paleo-Hebrew, there's nothing wrong with that. You're not communing with Yahweh because that is in your logic and intellect. That's your soul. Yes, it can be building up your flesh and edifying you, but you're not communing with him. So we've mistaken that, thinking that knowledge is communion, but it's not. It's not. Knowledge isn't communion. The Hebrew roots and Messianic movement have told you a lie. That increasing your intellect is communion with God. It's not. It's communion with other teachers and other puffed up individuals that lets you start to look down on your fellow man because you think you're really smart. But we're really not. We're only smart if the Spirit is in control of us as beings. So it's far too easy, I think, far too easy for us to settle into the default mode. Far too easy for us to settle into the default mode and substitute the thoughts or emotions of the soul for the works of the Spirit. If we do that, we're no different than the heathen, confining ourselves to this outer carnal realm, unable to ever reach the spiritual realm. And people go, why can't I reach the spiritual realm? Well, you're just interacting with the natural realm. How can you ever reach the spiritual if you're just interacting with what you see with your eyes, what you smell, what you see, what you hear, what you touch? That's not spiritual. The soul likes it because it's familiar to it. So let's look at a few scriptures because my time is running out a little and I don't want to go on too long. But I want us to understand this distinction because we need to build up the spiritual man within us. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11 says this, speaks of the spirit of the man that is in him. 1 Corinthians 5:4 identifies my spirit. 1 Corinthians 14:4 again mentions my spirit. 1 Corinthians 14:32 identifies the spirits of the prophets. Proverbs 25 verse 28 mentions his own spirit. Do you see this identity of the spirit? It's real. The Bible calls it out. Hebrews chapter 12 verse 23 records the spirits of just men. Zechariah 12:1 states that Yahweh formed the spirit of man within him. And Romans chapter 8 verse 16, the Spirit himself doth testify to our spirit that we are the children of Elohim. So we as humans beings, we do possess a human spirit. And where do we worship Yahweh? In our spirit and working within the framework of the Torah, which is truth. But we access and have communion in spirit. In spirit. So many of you have experienced the Pentecostal movement and you've seen some spiritual things that were real. But then it got a little crazy because they were worshiping in spirit, but there was no Torah to ground you from barking like a dog and doing the crazy stuff. Because you'd be like, well, hang on a minute, I don't see Moses did that. But there are some genuine spiritual things that happened that were real and authentic. But because they didn't have the flight manual of truth, the airplane kind of crashed after a while. And you're like, whoa, that was crazy. Don't want to be in that situation again. But how about we get up into the cockpit with the flight plan and then we can do amazing things again because we're in spirit and we have the truth where we can discern because we've spent some time in Yahweh's word, in our intellect, which is our soul, but now we can safely access the spirit. And I feel confident, and I think I'm with mature believers here, that we've spent enough time in the word that we can confidently access the spiritual realm and be okay. It's time for us to do that. It truly is, as the people of Yah, because otherwise we're going to be stuck with people being hurt, wounded, and leaving and broken. And you've never seen more of that than in the Hebrew roots and Messianic movement. Never. never seen as much brokenness and woundedness, and not even having the vehicle to be able to put the healing on. At least in the Pentecostal movement, people were getting healed. Yeah, then it went sideways and crazy things happened. You're like, okay, I think I need to go back to Calvary Chapel. I mean, I've ended up in several tents in different parts of the state, tent revivals, usually late at night when, the Bible, we'd go to like Calvary Chapel elders retreats. They were kind of like elders repeats, Oh, here we go again, another elders repeat. Didn't he do that sermon last year? Right? It was an elders repeat. And then we'd sneak off afterwards and find these like crazy Pentecostal things. And I remember when I was like 25 years old, and I took a bunch of kids and we were over in Smith rock climbing, and we did our Bible study around the campsite. And then we decided we'd go into town, and I took all these young kids to this like Pentecostal place, and they went in, and the guy was like pushing them, trying to push them down, and they were like, they wouldn't go down, and they were pushing back, and it was just embarrassing. And they came back and was telling everybody all about this, and this was like Calvary Chapel boys trying to mess with the Pentecostals. They would not go down, and they were strong rock climbers. They're like, she's like, hallelujah, da, 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 boom, and they'll be like, oh. So we did some fun stuff back in the day, but we're not going to be doing that. We have the Spirit and truth. Amen. So whenever I start speaking about this stuff, people get a little bit shifty in their seats. Like, where's he taking us? Oh, no. So let's finish up with this, getting this understanding. I want to lock this understanding so that we can come back next time we visit tomorrow. Because this amazing human spirit that came from Yahweh's spirit is within all of you. This amazing spirit, think about it. This amazing spirit that's within all of you, it came from Yahweh's spirit. Some of you look fabulous, but your body still came from the slime, as my translation said. Doesn't matter how you try and form it and pump it up, it still came from the blooming slime, okay? But your spirit came from Yahweh. Wow. And we're going to focus on trying to make our slime look good? Right? So, look at the three main functions. We're finished with this. The three main functions of the Spirit. Number one, conscience. Conscience. Number two, intuition. Intuition. And number three, the most important, hallelujah, communion. That's where I commune with Yahweh, is in my spirit. And for me, the quickest way to get there is I've always in my house, always have an ottoman. And my family, we just gravitate to the ottoman, throw the scriptures down, and we'll open the Psalms and start praying the Psalms that it's us speaking. And then we'll, boom. And that's where I meet Yahweh so fast, so quick, is praying his word back to him from my heart. And then, may you go against my enemies, Father. Bring them to nothingness. And I'm just like, and then I'll start going off on it. But this is the Spirit, and my spirit cries out. So we have these very anointed ottomans in the Nolan house. So it's pretty amazing. Lots of prayer. But the three parts of the Spirit, conscience, intuition, and communion. So let's look at these scripturally in depth, and then we'll finish up and close for this afternoon. So let's look at the three, the conscience in man's spirit. Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 30. Yahweh, your Elohim, hardened his spirit. Right? So the spirit can become hardened. When a person's conscience becomes hardened, That's a problem, is it not? Psalm 34, verse 18. He saves the crushed in spirit. So the spirit can become crushed. Psalm 51, verse 10. Put a new and right spirit within me. So that crushed spirit can be renewed by communion with Yahweh. So we're looking at the conscience in man's spirit. John chapter 13, verse 21. When Yahusha has thus spoken, he was troubled in spirit. Even the master's spirit was troubled, was vexed. Acts chapter 17, verse 16. His spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. How many of you have experienced that? Oh my goodness, I used to go to this Chinese restaurant. I used to love their food. I can't even go in there now because my spirit is so troubled by the idols. My wife, she's going to be so embarrassed that I told you this, but look at her nails tomorrow. She'd love to take care of her nails, and she found this new place that they did her nails, some kind of new way. You most probably know that they do it, not acrylics or anywhere. And she came back and she's like, I just don't think I can go there anymore. I was like, why not? You've been telling me that you love your nails. She's like, they have got all these idols everywhere. And I said, well, if you want, I'll come down with you and I'll do the Abraham. I'll tell them. She's like, oh, no. I said, no, seriously. I mean, I just talk to them from a business point of view. She's like, what do you mean? I said, it's just, I don't use this word very often. I said, it's just stupid to do that stuff. Anyway, they're alienating half of their clientele. I mean, how do they know? Get rid of the idols. It's going to increase your business. I mean, how do you know how many believers are coming in and seeing that stuff and being troubled by it? So she switched to go to a new place because they didn't have all these little Asian idols. I mean, yeah. So, yes, that was her spirit that's troubled. My spirit gets troubled by that same thing. It's usually around Chinese restaurants. But, you know, this is what the scripture says. The spirit gets troubled. That's the conscience. My conscience will not allow me to do certain things that the heathen can do. Or the carnal Christian doesn't even bother them. They don't even see it. My conscience, the spirit, will not let me sit under an idol and eat food. I just don't feel cool about that. I don't enjoy my dining experience. I'd rather be at home. I really would. But that's the spirit, because I'm very sensitive in the spirit. Let's look elsewhere. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 3. I am present in spirit, and as if present, I have already pronounced judgment. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 13. I had no rest in my spirit. How many of you have felt that? No rest. I got no peace in my spirit. Well, come on, let's do. I just can't. Well, why not? I have got no peace in my spirit. I can't do it. I don't know why. I just have got to trust the spirit within me. How many of you have said that? I can't tell you how many times I have said that in my life, and it's most probably saved my life. Saved my life. Listening to the Spirit. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. For Yahweh did not give us a spirit of timidity. Did he? He wants to awaken up that spirit. So look, there we have conscience in the spirit realm. Now let's go into intuition within the spirit realm. Let's look at a few scriptures concerning intuition. Remember, the spirit is made up of conscience, intuition, and the best, most intimate place is communion. We just looked at the conscience in the spirit. Now we're going to look at some scriptures of the intuition in man's spirit. Matthew chapter 26, verse 41. The spirit indeed is willing. Mark chapter 2, verse 8. Yahusha perceiving in his spirit. That's intuition. Mark chapter 8, verse 12. He sighed deeply in his spirit. John chapter 11, verse 33, he was deeply moved in spirit. Acts chapter 18, verse 5, Paul was pressed in the spirit. Pressed in the spirit. Acts chapter 20, verse 22, I am going to Jerusalem bound in the spirit. And 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11, what person knows a man's thought except the spirit of the man which is in him? 1 Corinthians chapter 5, chapter 16, verse 18, they refreshed my spirit as well as yours. And finally, 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 13, his spirit was refreshed by you all. Do you see that? Look at those distinctions. And now let's go to the last, communion. The most important, the spirit is where we have communion with Yahweh. We cannot commune with Yahweh in our flesh, no matter how smart we are, no matter how much logic, reason, and intellect and will we have. We can will it. I will read the Bible every day for 2 hours. I will pray for an hour every day. I've done all those things. And I never had communion. But being humbled and broken and having the soul be humbled, who Matthew naturally is, be broken and humbled, then the spirit having the power, that's where the communion is. And a minute can seem like eternity. Whereas I used to wrap myself in tefillin, phylacteries, and say, okay, I'm going to spend an hour in prayer. And I would go through all of that, willing it in my soul, and still not getting the communion. I had the discipline, I had the will, but my soul was in charge of my life. But through humbleness and going, I can't do this, then the Spirit is where I get the communion. Luke chapter 1, verse 47, my spirit rejoices in Yahweh my Savior. Oh, there is nothing like your spirit leaping with joy. Leaping with joy. Just like Elizabeth's spirit leapt with joy when she saw Miriam. John chapter 4, verse 23. The true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit. There's the worship and truth. Romans chapter 1, verse 9. Whom I serve with my spirit. That's where we serve Yahweh, not in our flesh, not in our will, but we truly serve him in our spirit. Romans chapter 7, verse 6. We serve in the new life of the Spirit. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 17. He who is united to the Master becomes one in, not soul, not body, but in spirit with him. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 15. I will sing in the Spirit. We want to sing in the Spirit. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 16. If you bless with the Spirit, bless with the Spirit. And Revelation chapter 21, verse 10. In the Spirit he carried me away. I was just talking to Jasmine this morning. Raise your hand up, Jasmine, in the back there. She was telling me that she sat down with a man that was bound up in satanic oppression, and she was witnessing to him for how many hours? 8 hours. And after 4 hours, the spirits had him so bound up that he was not receiving anything that she had to say anymore, that he became comatose and started drooling out of the side of his mouth. And she knew that she had to act in the Spirit and called, this is when she wasn't quite functioning in the high levels of the Spirit, the Seventh-day Adventist group, And she freaked them all out by what she did next, which was to sing in the Spirit to the man for several hours. And by singing in the Spirit, singing in tongues and singing to him, he came back out of that. And then the next day, accepted Yahushua as his Messiah and got baptized. Powerful testimony. You will bless in the Spirit, and it is the Spirit that will carry us away. Revelation chapter 21, verse 10. In the Spirit, he carried me away. And that's what Yahweh is wanting to move us into as his people in this generation, because that is where we will truly find our one new spiritual man. So I hope you can understand my heart and desire, because I believe it's the heart and desire that the Father's put on many of us to move the body into this active one new spiritual man. Lots to think about, but we'll come back and share more about this tomorrow as we really seek that spiritual new man in Messiah. Amen? Questions, comments, anybody? Father, we just thank you so much for this afternoon. We thank you for the rains, and we thank you for your provision. We thank you for the Sabbath, and Abba, and ask that you would bless us and keep us and raise up our spiritual man to be that spiritual leader in our community. Abba, that we would find victory not only against sin and overcoming sin, but overcoming our natural selves and overcoming the spiritual satanic forces that would try and do injustice and works of iniquity against us. Deliver us, Abba, and make us be that spiritual light in the nations in Yahushua's mighty name. Amen? Amen. All right, stick around.